to clap your hands if you'd like to have $1 trillion. Now, for some of you that didn't clap your hands, to be clear, that's a 1 with 12 zeros after it. I know $1 trillion can be a hard amount to wrap your head around, but let me help. 1 trillion seconds is about 32,000 years, right? So while we won't live for 32,000 years, we can get to $1 trillion in this lifetime. Growing up, I had no idea what $1 trillion was, let alone any concept of wealth. I grew up in southern New Jersey, Salem County, mostly known for Cowtown. Yes, that's real. Growing up, we went to the Cowtown flea market for shopping. We visited the Cowtown rodeo for entertainment. And on the very rare occasion we dined out, we were super fancy. We went to the Oak Diner. There was not much going on in my little city unless you were into cows. As a child, the only images of wealth I knew were on TV. I recall the first time I saw lifestyles of the rich and famous, I didn't think those people were real. I mean, no one lived like that in real life, right? I had limited exposure to financial success. We never talked about money, and what I saw were, well, cows and working class people struggling to pay bills, buy clothes, or afford groceries. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I didn't see on lifestyles were people who looked like me. So because of where I lived and a lack of representation of Black wealth, I learned I didn't have permission to have champagne wishes and caviar dreams, that I was born with the odds against me, behind in creating wealth, and that it would take too many generations to build it. So when it came to money, I thought, no way, no how, unattainable, so why bother? And I'm not the only one who was taught to think that way. Now, I could never accept it, and neither should you. So I majored in finance in college, and I've worked in financial services for 20 plus years, and learned that the systems and structures that taught me to believe I was unworthy in wealth have created one of the greatest burdens to the American economy, the racial wealth gap. But here's the truth. Anyone can build wealth. Gaining knowledge about financial literacy, which is accessible to all of us, can create a butterfly effect that will benefit your family, your community, shrink the racial wealth gap, and grow our economy to the tune of $1 trillion. The racial wealth gap in the United States is the average disparity in household incomes across races and ethnicities. The gap is most pronounced between Black and white households, but that doesn't mean that other minority and underserved communities aren't impacted by the disparity of wealth in our country. The recent data suggests that, all things being equal, the wealth of a Black family is 1/10 that of a white family. Historical data reveals that no progress has been made in more than 70 years in reducing these inequalities. Compounding the issue, the pandemic has exacerbated these inequalities, having a more devastating impact on Black Americans and other minority households than on more affluent and privileged demographics. This persistent racial wealth gap is not a new phenomenon, has worsened over the years, and is not an accident. Scholars say it represents the accumulated effects of 4 centuries of institutional and systemic racism throughout American history, continuing to this day, and systemic issues that bear the bulk of responsibilities and disparities in income, health, education, and opportunity for Black Americans. I bring this up not to point fingers or to place blame. I bring this up because I believe what we get wrong about the racial wealth gap is that what got us here doesn't necessarily need to keep us here. I consider myself an actionable person, always seeking solutions and thinking forward. I'm a realist, but I'm ready to disrupt the status quo. But I can't do it alone. So starting today, I want each and every one of us to take actionable steps to grow our own wealth, and in doing so, work towards closing this gap, which will begin to affect the systemic issues that created it. I want to open the door to financial literacy for everyone and unlock opportunities to build and grow wealth. Back in South Jersey, I had an uncle who would drive around the neighborhood in his burgundy pickup truck, collecting random items that people left on their driveways. He would negotiate with the owners to pick up their obscure items, then sell them. Basically, he found and sold junk. Demand grew over time, leading to a successful, thriving business. When he died a couple of years ago, he was a millionaire. Now, who knew selling junk could be so lucrative? What shaped me was seeing how many people he helped in the community by giving them jobs and opportunities, which created money in motion. The truth is, it was less about the junk and more about the ownership. A study found that Black business owners have 12 times more wealth than Black people who don't own businesses. These businesses contribute up to $165 billion in revenue and create more than 1 million jobs. That's additive to the economy. Imagine if we all start our own form of business ownership. Now, the other form of ownership that some people fear or have little to no experience with is investing. Wealth cannot be created without some form of investing. Throughout my career in financial services, I've seen the impact of it. I recall early in my wealth building journey, I started investing in mutual funds. Little by little, as I became more comfortable, I turned to stocks, building a diversified portfolio. Now, it all started with under $1,000. I know $1,000 can be a lot of money for some people, but here's my point. You don't need a lot of money to enter the market, but you do need to educate yourself and start investing if you want to build wealth, which means financial guidance. A financial advisor, in my experience, is a plus. Throughout my career as a financial service executive, I had the opportunity to work with financial advisors every day. And I want you to know that they're not only there to serve the rich. Ownership in companies through investing could help shift the gap and begin to work towards closing this wealth gap and impact the systematic issues that have created it. Did you know in 2020 that the purchasing power of Black Americans rose to 1.6 trillion? Imagine if even a fraction of that went into ownership through investing. That's real wealth. We can't talk about wealth without discussing the wage gap, a major contributor to the racial wealth gap, which means parity in wages. Parity is the condition of being equal with regard to your job or status. Know your worth. Research your job and know what the going rate is for your industry. Consider your experience and negotiate your asking price. Yesterday's prices are not today's prices. The disparity, how much it costs the US economy with Black wages today versus what they would be at full parity, is nearly $220 billion. That's right, $220 billion. Now we know there isn't always parity in opportunities, but we can forge ahead by seeking parity in our wages. Like the greatest philosopher of the modern age, Beyonce says, "Give me my check, put some respect on my check, or pay me in equity and watch me reverse out of debt." Equity. Equity is a chance to level the playing field. Equity is different from equality. Equity acknowledges the faults in the system that create disparity. Equity acknowledges that creates the faults in the system that create disparity and offers varying degrees of resources to help people suffering at different stages. Equity promotes fairness by acknowledging that not everyone starts with the same resources or experiences the same levels or barriers to success. Since we know opportunity isn't always equal, there isn't parity in opportunities always. Providing more opportunities with access to capital to Black and minority-owned businesses through programs and grants could generate $1.6 trillion to the economy. You see, equity is really about access and can be a game changer to enter a world that's not just for the rich. And we can't talk about wealth without discussing net worth. Your net worth is your assets minus your liability. Now, here's a staggering statistic from Brookings Research. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the median wealth of a white family is 10 times that of the median wealth of a Black family. If Black households held their share of the total wealth in proportion to their share of the US population, that would equate to $12.5 trillion in household wealth, rather than the actual sum of $2.5 trillion. That's 5 times as much wealth. The numbers do not lie. Wealth begets wealth. Now, the discussion about net worth is not a discussion about savings or financial literacy alone. Net worth provides access to influence, and influence provides access to power. That's why Black and underserved communities need to build wealth. Net worth helps to address the political systems that create laws which impact those same Black and underserved communities. The racial wealth gap is not my problem or specifically a Black people problem. This is a problem that impacts all of us. So it's time to disrupt the racial wealth gap, change our mindsets, and transformative ways to pursue progress on this issue. The opportunity to build wealth is available to everyone. I'm not saying it's easy. I recognize there are continued systemic hurdles, bias, as well as real opportunities to make progress when it comes to policies. Believe me, I get it. But it's time to flip the switch. Ownership, O. Parity, P. Equity, E. And net worth, N, are just a few ways to begin to open this process, make it more accessible, level the playing field, and begin to circumvent the barriers that continue to exacerbate the racial wealth gap. None of us can change the past, but together we can reshape the financial landscape and create wealth for generations to come. It is time to get this right. So I'm going to ask you again, would you like to have $1 trillion?